I started, normally I prepare very late for the press conference because I want to hear what goes on at the APNU's press conference. So I was told that Nagamootoo wants to sue me because I said he actively participated in the rigging of the 2020 elections, a position that I still hold now strongly, and I will repeat today. So I hope he would actually sue me, not just threaten to sue me, but he does sue me for saying that he was actively involved in the rigging of the last elections. But I started reading some of the things that he said, and the material is so overwhelming in the public domain to show the role he played, the active role he played in the attempt to rig the elections, that I can't even complete the material. So I have a ton of stuff from him, and a lot of this is very incriminating. That you recall this My Turn? He used to write a column for the PNC in the Chronicle called My Turn. And if anyone had the opportunity to, and I hope that people will do so today, that they will read the articles that he wrote in My Turn in the period after the March elections of 2020. You will see some of the headlines. I have so many that I couldn't even go through. Only valid votes matter. My Turn, Strange and Sad Saga, the Granger presidency. My Turn, bungled ballot boxes. 2020 polls, plotters and players. My Turn, recount exposes rigging fraud. Now this is a person who is very divorced from reality. Some people, it's a sickness, I believe, where you actually say things and then about yourself, and you start believing them. It's an overdose of narcissism. And he suffers from that symptom. So he, in an attempt today to reestablish his credentials that he always fought for national unity, and he always fought for free and fair elections, he has come up once again with this fiction. And what I said last week about the active role that he played in the period after the 2020 elections, that narrative runs counter to his portrayal of himself. So we can have this play out in the courts. We can have this play out in the courts. Now, what is active versus passive support for the attempt to rig the elections? So he takes umbrage over my use of the word active support for the rigging. There are a number of organizations today who pride themselves as the conscience of this society. If a tin cup knocks, they have an opinion to state. And often it is against the government. But in that period, when there was this blatant attempt played out every single day, there was nothing could have disguised that. Not the fig leaf, the biblical fig leaf, nor a forest could have disguised their attempt to steal the elections. any right-thinking person would know that it was the typical PNC playbook that they were working in line with. And those people stayed silent, the same ones today who have emerged as the conscience of the society, or re-emerge, I should say. They were there before 2015, the likes of the Red Thread, etc. I think Freddie Kissoon writes a lot about them. Those stayed silent, and he says they've lost the moral authority to comment on anything today, because when it mattered, when our freedom was at stake, when this country was at a crossroad between dictatorship or democracy, that they were complicit by their silence. So there is that category, and there is the category that went out there every day to justify the rigging. So the AFC came up with this fiction that the Russians were here and helping us to manipulate the votes, and they propagated it actively. Nagamootoo, in one of his documents, said, we got mercury. Now, mercury, I can't find all of these silly things that he wrote about, but let me just quote you what he said. Stripped of its technical lingo, all of that simply means that Mercury used a mix of personal data on voters and remotely located propaganda from its so-called troll farms to aid in rigging Guyana's elections in favor of its client, the PPP. Now, everyone knows Mercury is a PR firm in the United States of America. We were not silent about us hiring that firm. We made it public. It was in the public domain. This is a firm that is well known, made up of people from the Republican Party, or Republicans and Democrats. They're a lobbying firm. And why did we have to hire that firm? Because we had to fight off what you see every single day, the attempt to characterize the PPP in a particular manner in Washington among congressmen. And it happens every single day with Rickford Burke and all of the others. We've just seen this, the latest attempt at the IPADG activity, but the UN, that was held at the UN. And we had to make sure that the nature of the PPP and its policies was not misrepresented in Washington. Now, here is Nagamootoo saying that we hired a firm that used a combination of remote propaganda and people's personal data of the voters to rig the elections. And this was written after June 21st, 2020, after the elections. And he claims he never played no active role in attempting to rig. These were the guys who were creating the space by claiming falsely. I will not go into all the details here, but he claimed falsely that the PPP was attempting to rig the elections. Two, that he made a whole defense of Lowenfield's attempt to disenfranchise 122,000 Guyanese by declaring their votes not valid. Nagamootoo was one who, in a convoluted explanation, as he did when he attempted to justify that 34 was the majority of 65. If you look at it, his incoherent, convoluted explanation was also applied cleverly in the Chronicle, in this article, to create the conditions for the stealing of the elections because Lowenfield had illegally removed the votes of 122,000 Guyanese and given the majority to the PNC. He then made claims in the several headlines that I showed you, the bungle ballot, etc. boxes, the opposition plot to rig the elections, that the elections were tainted on the ground of fraud, that we were committing fraud. He listed about dead people voting for the PPP, persons who migrated, who didn't have proper identifications, the missing documents from polling stations, the same PNC propaganda that remain largely unproven. He repeated them. He had disparaging things to say about Mia Motley and Ralph Gonzalez when they spoke about an open, fair process for elections here. So we have a body of evidence to show he was actively part of the plot to rig the elections. And he, so I'm now going to today go through all of this. Let me just say clearly that any right-thinking person would have known that when you count the ballot at a place of poll and your polling agents, APNU had over 2,000 polling agents in each of these polling places, and they signed the statements of poll saying that we were here throughout the day, that these statements of poll reflected what took place in terms of voting. They signed it. That the declaration was going well until Mingo tried to falsify the results of the Region 4. Ignore the two attempts to falsify the results of Region 4. He ignored it totally, which showed when the recount took place that the PPP had won and that Mingo's figures were false. Their refusal to publish their statements of poll that showed that they lost the elections, and then used this fiction that a lot of, in the recount, and he was propagating this fiction like crazy, the same ones that I mentioned to you, about people voting and stuff like that. How could they know who voted for whom in the elections? How could they know who voted? So assuming they say 10 persons voted more than necessary, how could they have known who they voted for? Because the names are not on the ballot. And propagated a fiction that they did this because the tally sheets that were placed in some of the boxes, and now the tally sheets are not part of the official document. So when people vote, sometimes every polling agent has a tally sheet and they would tick off, but if they go to the washroom, they may not tick off. They may make mistakes and tick more. That's not the official document. So they were using this tally sheet because they couldn't use the core documents, etc. But they had no way of knowing how people voted. And they came up with this fiction of people who were abroad voting. You remember when they said that? We found 20-something of the names that they had put on the list. Immediately, we found the people. He knew that, but he defended it and created this fiction in his articles. Was that not actively trying to rig the elections? He was very, very much part of the plot to rig the elections, steal the elections. But it was his defense of Lowenfield stealing the people's votes that took the prize. So, so this is what the CCJ said. And clearly he knew this. Again, there was no need, right? If you look at, and this is reflected in the Commission of Inquiry report, and let me say that there was a full Commission of Inquiry into the elections, and that Commission of Inquiry concluded that there are individuals in GCOM who were trying to steal the elections in favor and often in complicity with the PNC-APNU AFC. So there's a conclusion from an international commission of inquiry. Every single international organization has concluded that this is so. Every right-thinking person in this country has concluded that that happened. And until now, Nagamoto and the others still hold the view that they won the elections, but they can't produce their statements of vote. Look at what Norton recently said. They can't accept that. So they're still in that fantasy land. But the CCJ couldn't even be clearer. The CCJ said, at the point in the electoral process where Article 177 2B is reached, there is no further need to reference valid votes because subject to Article 163, which is triggered by election petition after the election, the relevant validation process has already been completed. It is therefore unnecessary for the Court of Appeal majority to qualify votes in Article 177 2B by inserting before it the adjective valid, and in any event, they were wrong to do so. This is the CCJ saying that the attempt to insert an adjective before the word vote that is not only unconstitutional, but not valid. Article 177 2B rightly only needed to reference more votes, and there is no basis for the Court of Appeal to assume jurisdiction to interpret that provision. It is clear that under the legal infrastructure governing electoral process, unless and until an election court decides otherwise, the votes already counted as valid votes are incapable of being declared invalid or by any person or authority. And by the unnecessary insertion of the word valid, the Court of Appeal impliedly invited the CEO to engage unilaterally in a further and unlawful validation exercise unknown to and in clear tension with the existing constitutionally anchored electoral laws. I can go on. This is the CCJ wiping the floor with the Court of Appeal decision and with the CEO's attempt to make invalid votes that were already counted and part of the recount. And even after this, after the Court of Appeal gave clear instruction, now the CCJ gave clear instructions. What happened? Lowenfield came back, and instead of using the recount figures, he then went back to use Mingo's declaration to declare the results and submitted that report to the commission. He went back to the fraudulent results. And this was what Nagamoto was defending when he talked about the valid votes. The same Nagamoto shamelessly, the night of the no confidence motion, he accepted that the government had been toppled and that the constitutional provisions required elections within 3 months. And then he squatted, I said he squatted for 5 months in the house of the Prime Minister, enjoying the perks of the Prime Minister after the election, because he knew that even if the APNU had won, he still wouldn't have been Prime Minister, so he should have vacated the premises earlier. But he actually squatted there for more than a year and a half. And I was doing some quick calculations about how much we spend and if you have an imputed value for the rental of the property. We should recover from Nagamootoo for squatting illegally in that property maybe about $50 million and enjoying the perks of the Prime Minister long after he was eligible to do so. But he then, in one of these articles, he found that it was a plot. It was a plot of the PPP, and that the courts in Guyana and the Constitution that they upheld allowed them a plot to remove them early in their term. The courts and the Constitution allowed them to stay the full 5 years. And when you talk about needing medical attention for narcissism, this is what you should look at and divorce from reality. I hope someone looks at these things. I never read them. A waste of time. I know Nagamootoo. So I'm just, because he said he wants to sue me, I'm just going back now to read a bit about what happened in the past and what he actually said. And as I said before, you wanna throw up from it when you read this sort of thing. He says the Constitution and the courts allow them to serve out the full 5 years. It's not that. It's their fiction, their refusal to go to elections after he had admitted that the government had fallen, but using this fiction that 34 is the majority of 65, and defending it. It was their deceit. It was their low liveliness, if there is something called that, low life. This is typical low life behavior in Nagamootoo, low life behavior. And it's not behavior that is in the domain of Catiyous alone. It seems to be something characteristic of a lot of the AFC leaders. To say that the Constitution allowed you to do this in one of his articles, and when we know what really played out, and even after the CCJ ruled that they had to go to elections, that the government had fallen, and the Constitution is quite clear 3 months after, which should have been held latest by February or March of 2019, he persists with making this stuff, making this up. So I noticed in the whole story, towards the end, as they were getting closer to the results and he saw the writing on the wall, he came up with another fiction that we must have power sharing because sanctions were being threatened and everything else. And then I found something so interesting. So this is what, remember I pointed out how he invented this story in Machukar's book, telling him how he was going to fight in Vietnam, and he got to Mongolia, and he was prevented from going up further because they were not accepting people in Vietnam. He is prone to tell a lot of these stories. And in the extreme acts of sycophancy, because he constantly had to prove himself in the Granger administration. Remember, he was the known rubber stamp, so he did not have a portfolio. His only presence in that administration was to be critical of the PPP because he was doing nothing useful for the entire country. So he constantly had to prove himself. If you look at his speeches in Parliament, they were all about the PPP and everything else. He even wanted to fight with me one time when I exposed him. He wanted, oh, maybe I should have taken him on at that time. But in Parliament, when we exposed him. So the guys were reminding me a few days ago, I had even forgotten this sort of thing. So this is what he wrote on May 17, 2020. Amid social upheavals which cynics would from time to time refer as slow fire, more fire. Now there's cynics who are referring to this as slow fire, more fire. He used to be a cynic in the past when he referred to it, but as I said before, now he's on this side, he has to prove himself, so he is sycophantic. I was asked to give guidance to the PPP's leadership on a way forward. In the course of my talk at Freedom House, I advocated a power-sharing political solution. I stated that while the Janet Jagan presidency was non-negotiable, everything else should be on the table for dialogue and negotiation between the government and opposition. I'd appealed for the PPP to reach out towards liberal and progressive elements who might be associated with the opposition. I identified by name one such person, David Granger, a former Army officer and then publisher of Guyana Review. President Janet Jagan had ordered that my speech be published in a booklet and that 100,000 copies be distributed widely. Now, I knew this as a lie. I'm from in the party. So this morning, before I came late, so I was calling up all of the people who were in the leadership of the party at that time. And they said, why are you wasting your time? You know Nagamutu is a pathological liar. This never happened. This never happened. That Janet told him that he must distribute 100,000 copies of his speech and someone stopped it from happening afterwards. He never did any of this thing. The party leadership never asked Nagamutu for guidance on power sharing. It was his imagination. But you notice how he inserted Granger's name in sycophancy. So the Granger presidency, he was serving his purpose, justifying his perks under the Granger administration because he was practically, for all intent and purposes, useless. The rubber stamp, the known rubber stamp. So he had to insert the Granger's administration in. This is if people can lie this much, what else can you believe? So I'm actually looking forward. Let me get back to the beginning. I'm actually looking forward to a court case on this, the whole election again, and we must litigate this. You know, they had all of these things about why the elections were rigged. And the petitions that they filed, where are the evidence? They can't produce even their SOPs. They can't even produce their SOPs to show they won the elections. They can't produce who voted illegally. I would love him to produce those because I love to file an affidavit. I want him to go down in history because he's trying to redeem his place in history after his bout of opportunism, becoming a cheerleader for the destruction of the sugar industry, etc. I want his rightful place, which is a place reserved for opportunists in our history, for him to occupy that space and to expose that his unprincipled behavior. And I think a court case can help me to actually do that. But otherwise, he doesn't matter much. It's only because of his statement recently I thought I'd done with him and moved on to other things. He wants to sue me now. So, Nagamoto, I'm looking forward to it. The second issue that I want to deal with, it's the evaluation. The PPC has completed its work on the contract at Bellevue, awarded to TPU company. And I've seen a statement by the tender board on the contract, and I've seen the Minister of Finance make a statement. And lest I be accused that I want to jump into everything, I hope that more questions could be asked, because they had an initial look at the report. Then more questions can be directed to the Minister of Finance. I will answer questions here too, because it's not typical of the PPP that we hide from questions. So the Minister of Finance has made it clear in a statement about his take on the report. Welcome the report and pointed out that the recommendations will be taken into consideration, especially on evaluation, the application of evaluation criteria. And he thanked the Public Procurement Commission for the completion of the report. So here are some lessons that I want to have established from this report, and to show how our approach is very different than approaches by the APNU AFC. So one thing is clear that out of this entire process is that there was a public tender for all of the 19 pump stations that were being built across the country, including the one under review by the PPC. So public tenders. That an evaluation committee consistent with the Procurement Act was established. The evaluation committee was established. It was a multi-agency evaluation committee. So I asked who the evaluators were today, and they sent me this document. The evaluators were Mr. Randy Beckles, who was the coordinator for the particular project, and he is the procurement officer from the GNBS, Bureau of Standards. Ms. Shabana Omar, a civil engineer at the BNTF, Ministry of Finance, and Mr. Larry Carrell, a civil engineer at the ASDU, Ministry of Agriculture. These were the three evaluators. So they completed their evaluation report, and then the report was sent to the MPTAB, and then it went to the cabinet for no objection. So clearly, we had a multi-agency, the evaluation team established, consistent with not the law, but the law doesn't say they have to come from different agencies. They can all come from one. In this case, they came from 3 different agencies of the government to review this, in this case, this particular bid. So that's the second thing that happened. The third issue is that this record, the investigation of the PPC was initiated on the basis of a complaint by Patterson, the minister, not by a aggrieved bidder. So a number of people have commented, how come we complain about that issue, that it's more political, and when Patterson himself was subjected under the APNU government to an investigation based on a complaint by the PPP civic, Gail Teixeira. So are we not duplicitous? Well, the reason for the complaint against Patterson is very evident, and it's different. First is that in this case we had a public tender and an evaluation committee established by NPTAB and the recommendation by NPTAB to the cabinet. In Patterson's case, it was an unsolicited bid to the minister, an unsolicited proposal to the minister, which he took directly to the cabinet. So there was no tender process. The minister took somebody went into his office and dropped off a proposal. He then took that proposal, bypassing the evaluation committee and the NPTAB. He took it directly to the cabinet. The cabinet approved it. Now, the finding of the PPC at that time, and the finding was very clear, is that the Procurement Act that the PPP had passed when I was president removed the cabinet from direct award of contracts. It gave the cabinet a no objection role, that it is the NPTAB that awards contract, and then they seek a no objection from the cabinet. And should the cabinet not agree with their award, then it has to send it back to NPTAB with a note saying why it does not agree with the award. So that is what we changed. We are one of few countries that remove the cabinet from the award of contracts. It's done at NPTAB. Now in this, that was a clear breach. Nobody else could have complained. An aggrieved contractor couldn't complain because there was no tender process to have an agreed contractor. He took it himself. He just picked up his bag and somebody walked into his office and they awarded a contract for $140-something million, the cabinet, just like that, without any tender process. That's the big, huge, huge difference on this matter. And imagine the Patterson who breached the tender process there in that egregious manner. He today complains about a contract that went to public tender and that was evaluated by a multi-agency evaluation panel. Now, the PPC is saying that the application, they didn't have a rigid application of the evaluation criteria. But as the Minister of Finance explained, that you have to have new contractors. If you look at how many people, we're building 19 pumping stations now. 19 pumping stations. You have very few people with the capacity to build all 19, maybe 2 contractors who have built this with any in the historically. So you have 19 to be built, to undergo construction. So often you have to bring in new contractors who may not have the full experience, but you have to see if they have comparable skills, and then have a rigid supervision of the contract. So what the focus has been to, today I want to bring back the focus on what we are doing. Because APNU always complains about one thing. Mahipal goes someplace and talk about how deep you should drive the pile. and how the hole is narrow and all kinds of stuff. He knows he's an engineer now. That's his thing. Patterson complains about one contract. So what are we doing here now, this government, about building capacity? So they ignore that 19 pumps are undergoing construction now across this country. The 19 pumping stations, let me say pumping stations, because you will have 37 pumps installed in 19 pump stations. The number of beneficiaries, once they're completed, will be over 140,000 persons who will benefit from improved services in their communities, both drainage and irrigation of a domestic nature and also for agricultural areas. 140,000 odd people will benefit from these 19 pump stations with 37 new pumps being installed across the country. We lose sight of that this government is investing in people and ensuring that we're preparing for adaptation. We lose sight of the fact that we're adding by these 37 pumps 5,260 cubic feet per second pumping capacity. That's a massive amount of water that you can get rid of if we have floods. We lose sight of that. Let me recall what else we are doing, because sometimes if we don't speak about what we're doing, the media and maybe and others, they only focus on the problem with one or two contracts, and they don't see the big picture and the efforts of this government and the comprehensive plan we have to deal with adaptation, drainage and irrigation, the agricultural industry, etc. Two, we're now this year buying 40 new pumps, and we are going to purchase these directly from the manufacturers. We don't want to go through middlemen. 40 new pumps. Apart from these 90, the 19 pump stations with 37 new pumps being installed, we're buying another 40. These are mobile pumps that we can move around. If you have any flooding in Georgetown, we can move them swiftly here or in another part of the country. These are mobile pumps that we are now sourcing. And these will add 2,840 cubic feet per second pumping capacity. Again, massive. Thirdly, we are now spending $47 million on the World Bank program to rehabilitate and upgrade 63 sluices across the country. So these cokers that are in bad shape, etc., 63 of them, nearly $50 million would be spent on that, so that we have greater capacity there. That doesn't get mentioned. This is outside of the pump stations. We are also doing this year a number of Hope-like canals. We will spend about $26 billion. This is money that we earn from the sale of forest carbon, the HES program. So we said all of it will go to adaptation. So the Hope-like canals that will be built that will deal with, like in Region 6, 5, and 3. Several of these would be done. These will assist about, in Region 6, 188,000 acres will benefit from this improved drainage. In Region 5, 214,000 acres, and in Region 3, 28,000 acres. That will benefit from improved drainage and irrigation because of this spending here. So if you add all of this, in the 5 years, we will be budgeting around $115 billion in the period we've been in office, $115 billion to improve drainage and irrigation structures and to make our economy more resilient to flooding because of climate change, and to improve our capacity to address water management. Compare that to $25 billion under APNU in the 5 years. So $115 billion in this period. So you can see, I'm not comprehensive, I'm just giving you an idea, not just these 19 pump stations and 37 pumps, another 40 mobile pumps being procured, another 63 sluices being rehabilitated, several large-scale infrastructure projects like the Hope Canal to irrigate and drain nearly 500,000 acres of land. All of that under implementation now. In Georgetown, we've just bought an amphibious piece of equipment that's working now to clear the canals. Even when people are squatting along the banks of the canal in the city, it's now working, the amphibious equipment working in the city to clear the canals. We're adding greater pumping capacity in the city itself, right across the country. So I've even spoken about the hinterland areas as yet, to look at more water storage facilities and how we address drought situations and also flooding. So people do not see the big picture. And I wanted, while it is right for people and the media to focus on transparency in all of these projects, they need to see the many other projects that are successfully implemented and the government master plan. And then to see the difference between us and APNU. So I just pointed out how it's different. They were not tendering for anything in that past. So I just wanted, in my reading, because again, like when I started reading about Nagamotu, I found a treasure trove of nonsense that they had spoken about in the past. So I want to give you a little experience about APNU and how they approach these issues. This was what the PPC report said about Patterson breach procurement laws in 148 million contract award. This is the PPC report. So I want to take you off, and you might think it's a tangent we're going on, but just to point out some additional headlines. Chronicle, AFC leads opposition in slashing $1.2 billion from budget for specialty hospital. This was April 18, 2013. First budget cut for 2013 hits specialty hospital. Etc. Let me give you, I have a ton of it. So we then, the story behind the specialty hospital was when we identified the area next to Movietong to put the specialty hospital. The first comment from the opposition was, we're building a hospital for special people. It was a specialty hospital. It was like a hospital that specialized in certain tertiary care, not for special person. So that was the first comment, the specialty hospital. The second comment was, it's corrupt. So Ramjatan was hired by a company called Feathers Lloyd to complain, an Indian company, to say that the company that won the bid. They're not an Indian company, and this was financed from a loan from the Indian government, that company, there was a fraudulent transaction in the evaluation, and that the company that he represented, named Feathers Lloyd, should have gotten the contract. So Ramjatan, who was also AFC member, we believe there was a conflict of interest. So he was the lawyer for the company, and then he was in Parliament trying to block the project by slashing the funding, etc. So the Starbuck News, I think it was an interesting, I'm not sure which news here, might be Starbuck or Kaichor, did a interview with Ramjatan, and then they said, Ramjatan denies a personal interest in specialty hospital, and they questioned him about the same issue. How is it that you are representing this company now, and you're also fighting in Parliament to slash the project, to kill the project? And he said, he gave a number of convoluted explanation. Oh, the company had offered a discount, his company, and it was not taken into consideration in the evaluation. The NPTAB at that time said, we don't take discount into as a criteria in evaluating bids. But to cut the story short, he was questioned about his conflict of interest. So then, on November 26, 2015, miraculously, for the same hospital, the government of Guyana signed an MOU with Feathers Lloyd to build the same hospital, the specialty hospital. But guess who, with whom they've signed it? Feathers Lloyd. And that was Ramjatan's client. No public tender, not a single public tender for that project. So this is what government criticized for contracting company, and I think it was a Starbuck story that said, in light of Feathers Lloyd Corporation Limited being pulled from the special, no, let me don't go there yet. Let me just give you sequentially. So they signed this MOU. So then the Feathers Lloyd company was sanctioned over fraud and corrupt practices by the World Bank. And so there was a whole expose about the government of Guyana signing a contract with a company that was blacklisted by the World Bank that had been Ramjatan's client from the early period since 2013, and Ramjatan was central in killing the project under the PPP built by another contractor. So this is worth investigating. And then to connect this all with what I was speaking about, because drainage and irrigation, now back again. I was talking about drainage and irrigation. So how do we connect all of this again? So here on August 7th, the government of Guyana signed a contract with a company named Apollo to procure a large number of pumps. So I think it was 9 mobile pumps, 9 fixed pumps, and 3 mobile pumps. Not the pumping station, just to buy the pumps. Up to today, when those pumps came in, they're underperforming. Those pumps are underperforming that they bought. So they bought the pumps from Apollo, an Indian company. That was in 2018. And the person who signed the contract for the Apollo company was a person called Ajay. So I look at the same story in Starbuck News. And this is the final paragraph of the story. It says, Apollo's representative at yesterday's signing was Ajay, who had previously been here on behalf of the company Fidders Lloyd, the same Fidders Lloyd who was Ramjatan's client, who was blacklisted by the World Bank, that the government had signed an MOU with as soon as they got into office to supply these pumps that are underperforming today. The same man left Fidders Lloyd, and he then became a representative of Apollo. And so his appearance, this is what Starbuck News said. Apollo's representative at today's signing was Ajay, who had previously been here on behalf of the company Fidders Lloyd, which had been engaged for the now scrapped specialty hospital. His appearance for this contract will likely raise eyebrows. This is, it's synonymous with, you know what? You know what? So since we're talking about investigation of pump stations and procurement of pumps, we should have a full-fledged investigation. How is it that this company that was Ramjatan's client, that was blacklisted by the World Bank, the representative of that company ended up signing contracts for supply of pumps that are now underperforming, that were not meeting the rated capacity? Should it not be investigated fully? So when you really, we're so busy that sometimes we miss a lot of these things. Like you miss Ramjatan telling when the prison was burnt. A reporter, I think, had left their phone there or recorder, and it continued recording, and then they went back and collected it. So when the press conference, I think, was over in the prisons, Ramjatan was telling the prison authorities, you all tell me what needs to rebuild, that we have some AFC persons who could rebuild the prisons, etc. quickly. And it was recorded, and I think we can find a copy of that recording. And it was really one person who had contributed a major sum of money. But these things never go reported. So today we're talking about procurement of pumps. We're talking about investigation into procurement practices. This largely went unnoticed. No eyebrow was raised then because Starbuck News was questioning whether eyebrows would be raised. Well, now let's raise some eyebrows and ask Ramjatan what role, and the APNU AFC government, what role they played in the procurement of these pumps, how the representative for Fidders Lloyd ended up being the representative of Apollo now that got these contracts that was close to Ramjatan, that got these contracts that are for pumps that were supplied and underperforming today. It's worthy of full investigation. And APNU is one of the most venal, corrupt, or an AFC, corrupt set of organizations. They talk corruption all the time. They investigate it under us. These are the same people who refuse to submit for 3 years their Integrity Commission statement. And they talk the good corruption, talk about everyone, but they're very, very dirty when you probe. These are the same people who are awarding contracts for themselves in their own ministry. That's a story that's well known today. This is what's happening. Oh, there, yes. So I hope that we explore this in greater detail. One thing that is clear, that the procurement process is working once again under the government, even when there are issues with corruption, that the records are there, where you can easily investigate, etc. And by the way, there are two places that people can go if they are aggrieved now. And the PPC should urge people, if they are aggrieved, first of all, the bidders are aggrieved, they must explore the grievance mechanism that we establish by law. The first is that they can file a complaint with the tender board within a period after the award of the contract. They're obligated to investigate and to give a response. If they fail, if they do so, it doesn't preclude the person who is aggrieved from going to the courts further. It doesn't preclude them, but at least they should utilize a mechanism that we put in place. And that brings me to the mechanism now, since Patterson and the others are using this mechanism. So most of the complaints, or a significant part of the complaints before the PPC now, are filed by the politicians. Politicians, even when you have an open procurement process. Unlike when we filed against this politician, there was no open process for people to bid. So I'm pleased that this constitutional body is working, and the opposition is using it fully. Although I don't believe that in cases that they can bog this body down with their usual gaffe about corruption. But why isn't the opposition using another constitutional body that's set up by the same constitution that even has more powers than the Public Procurement Commission, which is the Ethnic Relations Commission? The Ethnic Relations Commission is empowered to even sanction the executive and sanction political parties if they use race as a mobilizing tool, and can investigate cases where people feel aggrieved as if they are discriminated on the basis of race. And we set that up. We advocated for it. We created a constitutional body that very few countries have. Why don't they utilize that? The chief elections officer now had utilized it, and the PPC, the Ethnic Relations Commission, had investigated, and they had an adverse finding there. Several people have used it. So if you think that there's so many cases of discrimination, you can use this tool like how they're using another constitutional body. Why is it that they can't do that here? Because they don't have evidence of institutionalized racism in the government. In fact, they see us, if you look at it, you will see attempt to fight racism by this government and party, and that they're the only racist party, the PNC. So that is why they go to catch the unsuspecting people at the UN forum. They can go to the UN forum and make a statement without consequences, like the one we had in Geneva, and no more recently, the one in the International Decade of People of African Descent. They go there and claim discrimination because it can't resonate here, but there is a mechanism that we set up that if people feel aggrieved, they can use the mechanism there. They would not use it, but they'll go there because it has propaganda value. They'll go to the Congress people and talk about it. They brought in a team here to investigate it. I didn't see the team put out their report as yet, because when they come on the ground, they find very different situations. So they're hoping for condemnation of the government in some international forum because people are unsuspecting. They don't know the details, and they don't know the Nigel Hughes and the others and this Wade, etc. So I was looking, and I want to congratulate Minister Onej Waldron for the quality of our performance and also the clarity of our performance, and for making it clear that our government supports the growth in all people, everyone, all of our people, including people of African descent. We are proud of our multi-ethnic makeup in this country. It's a source of pride for us. And we in the People's Progressive Party will work day and night to ensure that all of our people develop, every single one, all in the whole country, regardless of even how they vote. And so we are proud of that track record. And if you go in a granular way to actually see the party that has worked on developing scholarships and housing and employment opportunities, you will see, and so many other things, you will see the only party that has ensured prosperity across the board for people of every race has been the People's Progressive Party and governments that it has formed. It's clear in the record, but you have to go through details. They like to avoid the details by going to make declarative statements, because if you go to make a case before the Ethnic Relations Commission, you have to carry details. They would avoid that like the plague. So we need all of that they're saying about how we taking away money from them, etc. And then someone again referred me, so I looked at it, referred me to an article published by Dennis Chabral on 11th of June, 2018, International Decade of People of African Descent, Guyana, must be scrapped and replaced. And guess who said that? We're in opposition. We're in opposition. So who said this? Representatives of several African groups from across Guyana on Sunday agreed by majority to call for the country coordinating mechanism for the decade for people of African descent to be scrapped and a new body established over concerns about its formation and decision making. When the vote was taken, 36 persons showed their hands for the mechanism officially named the IPADG to be dismantled, and 16 persons voted for it to be repaired instead of restarting from scratch. 36 persons voted for it to be scrapped, and 16 said, let's repair it. I can go on, but if you have an opportunity to read this, you will see that you will see the criticism. It's detailed in here about how, let me just read. So Alexander has sued me about comments I made when I said that the IPADG and how, remember when they were going to the Coffee 250, which is a major part of the IPADG and disproportionately represented in the IPADG, they were going to hold a public function about saying that we're practicing apartheid in Guyana, the PPP government. And I pointed out, you recall that, and I pointed out, I think it was a press conference at the convention center, it just about gotten into office, about how the law they're established with beneficial ownership under the law. Members of the IPADG were listed as the beneficial owners because they were established under the Companies Act. Beneficial ownership means, well, it's if the agency is wound down, which is the typical commercial law and the Company Act of Ghana, that the beneficiaries would get resources. And I was pointing out that we continue to give them about $100 million a year in the PPP government. And the money was not going to ordinary people. And therefore, that it was it being spent on internally. And that was parasitic. And well, here this article really reinforced what I said. And this came directly from the African leaders. It speaks about Eric Phillips warned that the Ipadegy rental of office space at 121 Regent Street border from Charles Corbin would give political ammunition to opposition PPP to raise concerns about conflict of interest between Corbin and Ipadegy's chairman, Vincent Alexander, because they are both commissioners of the Guyana Elections Commission. Noting that Charles is the brother of the former, I can go on. Then they spoke about the hiring of staff of the Ipadegi. I don't want to read the whole article, but read this article done by Demerara Waves in 2018, or June 11, 2018, titled International Decade of People of African Descent Guyana Must Be Scrapped, Replaced. And then you will see exactly what we're talking about. Since then, there were concerns that it is not a representative body. It cannot, as Onej Waldron said, hijacked. It was hijacked the cause and the resources, or for the budgetary resources, the nearly $500 million of taxpayers' money that has been given to them and didn't go to the organizations or ordinary people. They hijacked it. And that is what their track record is. So I didn't see Nigel Lewis talk about this. I didn't see any of them talk about this. I hope someone will send this to the body. I hope that they will send this to the body to show the concerns of people of African descent and the organizations that were expressed long before the PPP return to office. I've seen the Patterson commenting on feasibility of power supply from a ship. Patterson still commenting on feasibility studies after the PPC found him to be guilty of doing a feasibility study for $148 million that he, through an unsolicited bid offer. So I dealt with him extensively and his failure as a minister and the lies that he told that he had put in place 60 megawatts of new power. I dealt with that at a previous press conference. I'm not going on it. But GPL still mum on rental costs for Turkish power ship. GPL has put out a statement. I've asked them to put out a statement, and they detail everything from the company to the power, the amount of power, which we said the last time, 36 megawatt, the cost of it, the rental cost, as well as O&M, where it would be located. All of that has been in a press release that came out of GPL, so that Starbuck News headline would be answered. We weren't mum, even whilst we were negotiating, we didn't close the deal as yet. And I even answered questions here when asked, where was it? I said, it's Car Power, it's a Turkish company, it's under 8 cents per kilowatt hour, inclusive of all of the other things. 36 megawatt. We give almost every detail, even before it was concluded. So that is not accurate. Now, I see the press conference by UPNU today, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to respond to them because who they have? Sherwin Holder. Sherwin Holder, I think he was, I don't know, I heard he was terminated by a private company And then he doesn't know anything about anything. Remember, he had no experience, never in government, even in a junior level. So how do you expect me to comment about anything he says at a press conference or anyone take it seriously? And De Low has been a man who, he was working at Sarah as a junior analyst. And these are the people that they put from this Burnham's party, Burnham's great party, PNC. They've reduced it to two mediocre persons who don't know their head from their foot to host press conferences on behalf of the party. So do you think we should? Nobody takes them seriously. Why should we take them seriously? So I'm not going to waste my time responding to them. If Norton says something, I might be tempted to do it because, please, he's the leader of the opposition. Now, it's been interesting about the developments. I've been asked about the developments in the PNC and the missing CPU. Now, lots of things around election time go missing for the PNC. The statements of poll at the national level are still missing. We need to now, somebody got these statements of poll up to now that show they win the elections, but they're missing. I think they took flight into outer space, and we need to get higher rocket to bring them back to Earth. So then the CPU went missing. Miraculously, the CPU that hosts their membership information. Now the CPU can't grow feet and walk out of the computer because it's a part of a computer and walk out the computer on its own. So somebody has to take out that part, and you notice just before elections, the CPU with the membership information disappears. But it developed a fault suddenly, and it walked out the computer on its own. Because the general secretary of the party saying, oh, this thing went missing, and Holder saying something else, and we don't know where this CPU is right now. So one member, they gave a best call for a forensic, I think he wants a forensic audit or something like that, an audit to check the CPU again. They're always good at calling for audits, but don't deal with the principle. This is typical of APNU. Typical. Internal or external elections. They will falsify, and you always have these problems around election time. So it's such an interesting thing for me. And I don't understand. People take it as routine, but it exposes the nature of that party, the very nature of the party, and the need to probe it a bit more. Because if they can't deal with that issue or be clear on it, how could you trust them to do anything nationally? We already cleared they don't have any plan. They don't have any plan for the development of the country. The media develops the plan for them. Every week they go and comment on the media. One week it's something, another week it's something else. They're just responsive all the time. They don't take a position, outline their plans, and then stick to their guns because there's no proper assessment of the plans and their sustainability and impact. So we're clear on that. We're clear that their vision is constrained to solving day-to-day problems alone. They can't see beyond the next year, and that is why the solutions that they often think are solutions are not applicable in any sustained system. And now we've established that a core value is not just to rig elections at the national level, But even internally, they don't have to deal with this issue. Now, we've always known NAPNU to use race at the national level to mobilize people. Race, racism, and lies. Killing, the PPP killing through extrajudicial killing. They already said, I see the IPADG people still running with the same old line at their presentation 2 days ago. Haven't changed much. That's it. And they're unwilling to change. Now, the future of this country is for all of the people, and they need to see themselves reflected in all of the institutions and parties, political parties. It's only when a political party makes a dedicated effort to reach out to people of every race and every religion and to work for their support, and gender too, and to work for their support, that it could consider itself truly national and can build this country in a sustainable way. Just look at the experience of APNU. Almost every person of Indo-Guyanese descent. Look at the guy from the treasurer. He was practically forced out after he complained about Norton, the 20 blank checks from Norton, one an Indian or there. Then Yubraj, who was called semi-illiterate, not semi-literate, semi-illiterate by Sherwin Holder. I'm not sure I disagree with the characterization. I'm just saying that he complained. Now, this vile anti-PPP guy who did nothing for the city, because he was just useless, basically. And he's a total sycophant. But even he complained that being marginalized based, I saw the Starbuck News article, that he complained about marginalized because of his Indian heritage. Then Amna Ali also is they say that she's PPP. Now she's become PPP. Now, you've ever heard Amna Ali in Parliament? Amna Ali, used to be the vilest from the other side. She and Nagas and all the others. And Amna Ali she was the one who said, bring it on in the no confidence motion, right? She was saying, bring it on and stuff. And majority is a majority and all of that. She is now PPP too. Very uncomfortable. And now they're complaining about racism internally in the PNC. Internal racism. So this party is a moribund party. It's dying because of its orientation. Young people, our future is our people working together. They want to see their party reflected of all the races and every class and every woman and men and everything else. How we look as a people of the country. And I'm proud to say this is the only party that does that, that is making an effort to do that, so that our people can work together. So it's very interesting. I don't want to comment more on their leadership fights now, but it's just that it's so clear that even if they get past these issues, they cannot lead this country, even if they get past these issues and the subsequent mending that will take place. Now, there's one, I'm going to deal with one editorial from the Starbuck News, and then end there. So this editorial was written on the 13th of April, 2024. And it's it says things like the government has vulgarly tried to defend the wholesale ripping off of oil by arguing that the country is a huge carbon sink and will remain so because of its large forests. So, first of all, we point out that our forest is a huge carbon sink. We show that even with a maximum production of 6 FPSOs, the total carbon, scope 1 and 2 carbon emissions of our production in Guyana will be about 120 million tons over 10 years, or 12 million tons per annum, leaving out the forest as a sink. The sequestration alone, the sinking and the removal are two different things, right? The sequestration. The annual recurrent removal of CO2 from the atmosphere is over 150 million tons per year, which it must not be confused with the storage. Storage is static, one is recurrent. Every year, our forests, because of their size, remove over 150 million tons from the atmosphere of CO2. We pointed out that this is more than the emissions of 3 large Scandinavian countries, a service which our forests provide, outside of the sink that they are mentioning here, the carbon sink. Confusing two concepts. So that's only at peak production. We're only emitting about 7% of what we annually would be removing from the atmosphere. So we will remain a net negative carbon producing country, even with peak production, both from the perspective of the stock, which is the sink, and from the perspective of the removal, which is the recurrent part. That's major. Secondly, we've argued that all of the scope 3 emission is that this oil is used in other parts of the world. So that's where you have to account for the emission when it's burned, because we have to account for the emission when it's produced. The countries that are utilizing it, because they have a choice of buying or not buying the oil, using it or not using it. So when the UK buys our oil, or India or the United States, they burn the oil, they emit the emission. So they have to account for that emission over there. If they choose not to buy oil and supply themselves or their demand for energy from a different source, then that's fine too with us. And that's why we argue that there must be a reduction in demand as part of the solution to net zero, apart from the reduction in supply. Because if the demand keeps growing and you don't meet the demand by renewable, you have to increase fossil fuel production, which is what's happening globally. So that is where the accounting takes place. And this is entirely consistent with the convention, the Intergovernmental Panel and the UN Convention here on how to account for carbon emitted. Entirely consistent with that. That's lost here. Then the justice argument that we now, the US is expanding production. Every country in the world is expanding, not just production of gas, or not every country. The countries that are producing, expanding gas production. Some are pumping more oil, and some have even returned to the production of coal, like the United Kingdom that wanted to ban coal, which is the most polluting of all fuels. they're expanding the production of coal. So where is the justice that we must stop? We must be responsible, stop producing oil here because we're worried about climate change when our forests can be an offset. But even without the forest, assuming without the forest, we are just producing a tiny part of the emission. It's utilized mainly in those countries. So where's the justice argument? They're expanding production. That's lost here in this editorial too. All of these positions get lost in this generalized thing. Now, I told you already there's an anonymous guy in Kaichor News who I think I know who might have done it. But look at the methodology for calculating carbon sequestration and all of that. And Googling it online, when there are documents to show the exact calculations that our forests, where our forests sequesters and store, based on practical studies and international verification, there are those available, and then they just use some Googling, some search on Google to justify it. But I don't want to get sidetracked by this. So here is the justice thing. So should we produce oil or not? Should we produce oil or not? Van der Radzik was asked by the BBC interviewer, and up to now we didn't get clear an answer. Sometimes they say stop producing, sometimes they say produce it differently. So the question is, should we produce or not? In the face of everyone else increasing. The wealthiest countries are increasing their production. And our fossil fuel, it's light sweet crude, it's less polluting, and we are a tiny part of the global production. The next question is, anyhow, let me don't go on much more longer because we can have a full defense. But let's conclude that what is vulgar here is not the government arguing they're ripping off of oil by arguing that the forest is a huge sink. What is vulgar is an attempt by some people conveniently to make us as the bad guys in this global system where we have taken consistent positions. We have argued for a carbon tax. You know what that means? Which oil producing country now has forcefully remained in the forefront of the argument for carbon tax? That means that in the countries where the oil is used, including our oil, that the people have to pay for the externalities. So if there's a carbon tax through the cap and trade system or a direct tax, then the price of oil for those countries will go up. And then it will give greater incentives for the introduction of renewables in those countries. Which country is doing that? So let's make it clear one thing, that this is a vulgar, the person who's writing there is the most vulgar. They refuse, and dishonest too. They're not saying we should, looking at the world. It's totally dishonest. And we never argued that because of the forest. Whether we had forests or not, we would have had to utilize this because justice-wise. But now our forests still give us we're morally superior in our arguments to those countries that like to lecture about climate change, because where they want to get to in 2050. We're already there, which is net zero. The whole world is now putting up their plans. The developed world, they have to submit their NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, through the UN system, and everybody says raise ambition, and all of them have to say how they're going to get to net zero. Guess where? In 2024, what they're aspiring to do by 2050, we're already there. We're already net zero and carbon negative. So nobody should lecture us again, as the president said, on this moral superiority. That's the first point. on the editorial. The second part is it's also a matter of conjecture why both ExxonMobil and the government of Guyana are keeping the public in the dark as it relates to the increased oil and gas reserves from recent discoveries. Withholding this information does not accord with transparency and accountability. So right now, there is an assumption that the information is being withheld. That's false. I've pointed out to you that we get these reports every 3 months, and the reports that we have that state that what the reserves are, and that has not changed materially over the past maybe year or so. So that's not withholding information that we have. The information about the reserves have been part of that report, and it's around the same 11 billion barrels. I've pointed out that the increased oil and gas reserves from recent discoveries, that a discovery doesn't mean that you know the size of the reserve. That to get the size of reserve long after the discovery, you have to do appraisal, see the type of rock, a complex process before you get to reserve, the establishment of reserve. So it's false from that second premise, that immediately as you discover, you then know what the reserves are. The third thing we pointed out is that the reserves, the discoveries would undoubtedly either, and greater appraisal wells would adjust the reserves. Some cases may be down and maybe up the 11 billion we have first of all. And undoubtedly they will grow the reserves in the future once you finish appraisal. But we pointed out that even already the amount of reserves we know that we have will justify a number of investments. And it's through the not knowledge of the reserve, but the investment in producing the oil that matters most, because when you produce, that's how you get the revenue and the other economic activities. Our focus has been on giving the 6th license, which was done recently. There is no additional request for another license at this point in time. So that has been the focus, because knowledge of the reserve is not automatic. A lot of countries know reserve. Suriname may know some of its reserve, but can't get to an FID up to now for a project. So we pointed this out, that flew over the head of everyone, or not everyone, but some of these people. So from 3 perspectives, this one sentence is wrong. I've just pointed out, and it's egregiously wrong. It doesn't reflect what we've explained a million times. So Guyana must adumbrate a depletion policy that aligns its reserves with intergenerational equity. And no, let me read the whole sentence, because I stopped there. Guyana must adumbrate a depletion policy that aligns its reserves with intergenerational equity and its requirements to modernize Guyana and transform the economy away from oil and gas. So, 2 very important things, but again, in my view, contradictory and short-sighted, and doesn't reflect what the reality of the world is today. And we have explained this. When we said that with climate change now, there is a move to move away from oil, the production of oil and gas, fossil fuel. That's a trend, and the Stabrook editorial said that we must do that, move away, refine a policy to, or announce our policy to transform the economy and move away from oil and gas. So that's happening. How do we, so this is a global thing, and why does this have to happen? Because we're worried about climate change, and we're all trying to get to net zero. So if you're going to have a depletion policy, which is production really, and at the rate of production. So you know your reserve, the depletion policy is how much you produce over a period, the rate of production. And they want to do this, align it with intergenerational equity. So we must leave enough reserves in the ground for the people to produce in 2040. That's effective. Like, so align our production in that. But by 2040, the world will want to move away totally from fossil fuel production or minimize it. It's contradictory. It's almost, I don't understand how people could do a full-fledged, practical, technical analysis and still mix up two contradictory objectives and call for both in a single sentence. That we recognize that the world is moving rapidly to decarbonize, so our depletion policy is try to get, in this period when there is still a demand for fossil fuel, try to get as much of the resources out now. That is why the approval of these projects, get those resources out, secure the investments now because they'll be later harder to secure when the world, the banks have already started banning investment in fossil fuel, etc. Get those resources converted from oil in the ground to financial assets or infrastructural assets, and then utilize those assets, the financial assets, to ensure that we have intergenerational prosperity. Because we know that oil and gas cannot in the future deliver intergenerational equity. That is why we have already determined our depletion policy, which says front load or as much oil production now, not have a rate of production that goes for up to 2050, because we recognize by 2040 or 2050, we may not be able to produce oil because the demand will slump so radically. That is a real possibility. And so how could you do these two things together in the same paragraph, in the same sentence? Call for contradictory objectives. Then it goes on in one editorial. How it cannot be easily apprehended how the government could be entertaining a possible sixth extractive platform when it does not have a regulatory petroleum commission in place. Now, how did we do the 5 orders? And how are we producing from 5 orders? So they can't understand how we could do the 6th one and not have the Petroleum Commission. And I've explained that 100 times. They have now ignored that we have changed a very fundamental issue. The fundamental issue that we have changed now is the Petroleum Activities Bill. That is the legislation under which the oil and gas is regulated. It's still being, now the new provisions have to apply to the oil and gas companies, whether you have a petroleum commission or not. The GGMC applies the new framework to the oil and gas sector. So a massive earth-shifting change has been made in the regulatory framework, and they're stuck on, the commission, how you can approve a 6th one. So without the commission, that has changed, and that's major. We have already said, if you look at, we have made every license public, including the sixth one. It's made public, it's on the website. Contrary to what APNU did. They didn't put the first two licenses that they had up on the site. We put all of the licenses that we have approved. And you see the major differences. Please read the differences. Read the differences and you'll see the qualitative change in the regulatory licenses and the obligations of the oil and gas companies. The environmental permits have changed. We're now working on law to deal with spills, etc., apart from guarantees that there'd be legislation to hold people responsible. We made that clear. So these are all issues. We've passed a local content law to make sure that more people can benefit here. And they're saying this sixth license, how could you do it without this one thing? And even in terms, if you look at how we're starting to address things like the decommissioning fund, in the new license, we've already started because the Stabroek agreement, the PSA, had a particular approach to that. In the new law, it now says that the decommissioning fund will be treated different than how the previous, how it was treated in the past. And that's because of the change in the law. So if you look at the qualitative changes there, you wouldn't ask that question. You wouldn't even ask that question. That's the next point. And then this one. So there's greater chance of an iceberg in the Amazon River than ExxonMobil removing its armada from the Stabroek block. So they're saying if we renegotiate, Exxon will not remove. It is not the removal. How many times have we spoken about the loss of momentum? The loss, we have seen what the loss of momentum through legal cases, not just the removal and the breach of contract, what will happen, but the loss of momentum. That's one. Two, the possibility of exposing this country, the government of Guyana and the people of Guyana, to multi-billion dollars liabilities, multi-billion US dollars of liability, money that we don't have. So why do I say that? And look at this carefully. Indeed, so it goes on here. It says, indeed, the 2016 PSA recognizes the possibility that the two sides can renegotiate. So when I read this, I said, really? Am I reading something else? In the PSA that Trotman signed, is there the possibility of renegotiating? And so where is this? And then I heard there was an editor's comment to say it was Article 32, I think, of the PSA. After a letter questioned it. 32 or 33, I think it might be 32 of the PSA. So guess what the head is? Guess what the head is? For this bold statement that in 2016 PSA provides the basis, the possibility that the two sides could renegotiate. Guess what it's titled? It's called a stability clause. This is the stability clause. And so, imagine a stability clause preserves the benefits of the agreement. So the stability clause says, notwithstanding any subsequent changes you make, or if you renegotiate and it inures to the detriment of the company, that they can go to arbitration if there is a dispute. And the arbitration has the power to amend the PSA to ensure that they get back their benefits and also to award damages. So that's international law. Whether you like it or not, you have to, once you're part of this world, you have to go to arbitration. At the end, if you make any changes, if you pass a new law that takes away any benefit, that is what Strootman signed on to in the Stability Clause. So imagine they're saying that the Stability Clause is the basis for renegotiating. It's the stupidest thing I've ever seen in my life in an editorial. And in fact, it's one of the most compelling reasons why you cannot renegotiate, because Exxon will accept if they agree with it voluntarily, and they've made it clear they're not going to agree with it, so you have a dispute. You're going to have a dispute. And the dispute ends up in if we pass a law that takes away any benefits from them now, that Stability Clause says they can go to arbitration. If we take away any benefit from them, any changes to the PSA, and not just to reform the PSA, their arbitration panel has the right to make sure that they get back their originally intended benefits, but to award damages. Now, let me tell you what that has happened, how that has happened to us. We now have a demand for $100 million on the parking meter. It's before arbitration panel now. We were not part of the parking meter thing that was signed, the contract by the new government and city council. We're not part of that. We've already spent over $2 million in legal fees to fight that case. What if there is a big award? The country has to pay that for something that never worked, a bad decision there. Just imagine if they go and they get a $10 billion award, because this is this magnitude of the scale. We haven't even collected, we collected the first 2 years, we collected under $2 billion. Last year, we collected about maybe another 1.6 billion. And you get a $10 billion award for damages and for loss of value. Who gonna pay it? Glenn Lal would pay it? The people of this country will pay it. These same people would say, oh, we told you so. We told you so. You shouldn't have done this. The same people. So this is what, in one editorial, and that's just reflecting what is going on, the silliness in Kaichor News too. Some of it. The same kind of unthinking, or ring fence, half fence, two fence, all kind of comes in it. They don't deal with that. They don't deal with the consequences of action. They don't deal with that. And then misleading headlines every time you speak. So I just wanted to point a few things out in editorials, another ripoff of the Guyanese people. And this must be coming. You see, it's hard to know where they come from, because as I said before, this news has been fairly sensible on all of this. It's a more serious newspaper than the Kaichor News. But they want, these anonymous editorials tend to be not just infantile, they're just not reflective of any technical thinking. It's just like statements of emotion. And we can't manage a country by emotion. Just like that. You gotta think about consequences. Thank you. All right. Stop. I'm giving Starbuck first because since today I tackle your editorial.
Marcel Thomas from the Starbuck News.
Yeah.
First thing is on the GPL's release. I think the burning question for consumers throughout the country is, does this rental have any, or would it have any impact on their bills, an increase on their bills at all?
The answer is no.
No.
There will be no increase in the price of electricity because of this rental. Let me go back to the government at 22 cents per kilowatt. I think it's about maybe $44, $50 per kilowatt hour, but 20-something cents. The government is already subsidizing the power to people, business, etc. Let me just give you an idea. I saw a correspondence from a mall, to say that because they have to generate full time, they want their tenants to increase their power bill by 13%. So that means that the government was basically subsidizing that too, because now they have to self-generate and all of that come fully on. So it just gives you an idea. And if you extrapolate this for the country, it's a large sum of money that we use to keep the price of electricity fixed. Since we got into office, we kept it fixed in spite of the increase. So there shall be no increase in the price of electricity because of this rental.
For the next 2 years?
Yeah, for the next 2 years.
Okay. Now, that's clear. One, if you can respond to the hot dog allegations that PPP
What hot dog?
in Wakenham, that one of your officials there is leveraging their allegations that they're, I don't know his name.
Huh? So who is he? Who is Sadiq Ahmad?
I don't know him. Anyway, a counselor, but he is leveraging hot dogs for the cash grants.
So what for what?
That was in a story. You didn't see it?
No, I didn't read the story. I don't read yes, everything.
You
so what he wants to leverage it for?
There is a PPP hot dog fundraiser.
Uh-huh.
And he's telling the people if they don't buy these hot dogs, then they wouldn't get any of the PPP support in Wakenham.
And the PPP support what? Roads or?
In terms of monies, in terms of grants, in terms of anything.
Oh, well, but the thing is that, look, well, yes, so I'm interested how we have we won over 1,000 seats in the local government elections. We had over 2,000 councillors. Well, we contested over 2,000. If you look at the number of officials, how is it one councillor, or I don't know who is basically a councillor, in Wakenham, or Legwan? Legwan. Well, I don't know where he is from. How is it that a councillor who says something to somebody becomes the national story here? When you look at all of the things, APNU just had a missing CPU, the PNC. We're not concerned about that. And one man say, oh, if you don't buy my hot dog ticket, you're not going to get no help. Tell somebody there, obscure people. And you want to bet it's an person who exposed this? It would be a person like Mahi Paul who would pick up something like that. Check if it's not one of the Mahi Pauls that put that out in the public domain. A person like that. It's like when the police used to sell barbecue tickets and they say to people, you're get into trouble if you don't buy a barbecue ticket. You think that's the official policy of the police? That a man don't buy their barbecue ticket, etc.? It's pure nonsense. This man doesn't control who gets help from the PPP. We help everybody. And so that becomes a stupid story at the national level because some councillor tell a man hot dog. I don't know how many hot dogs we sell in any case at the PPP level. It is every little, a pin drop is PPP. Oh, hot dogs now I'm hearing about. And who promised hot dog? The whole dog could drop from the APNU and you don't even get a question about it. Not the little hot dog. The whole dog would drop down on their deck. If I worry with all what all APNU councillors at the local level say or do, you think I'd go mad? I'll go mad. We have thousands of members, tens of thousands of members everywhere. A man trying to make a hustle, get somebody to buy a ticket, he can't sell his ticket and say, you know, you're going to get no help. Our help is not determined on the basis of who buy hot dog in this country. I would have been in Sophia selling hot dogs too. I just came out of Sophia, and we're building roads there, over $1 billion of roads in Sophia. You think I carry the hot dog stand in Sophia and say, buy the PPP hot dog so you get your roads? So please, no, Marcel, I'm surprised you would bring this hot dog story to me here from the Starbrook. I expected that from Kaichor News, to be frank with you. Hot dog, some story. Let's move to the second one. All right. So,
I should leave that one for last.
I know it's funny, but all right, I'll give you a minute to compose
The
yourself.
other one
with the
is,
hot dog.
if you can give an update.
All right. She can't help laughing. But give someone else. I'll come back to you, Marcel.
Naomi Paris, Guyana Chronicle.
Yeah.
Following yesterday's mishap at the Starbrook Market Wharf, President Ali would have said that there will be a cabinet meeting in terms of reviewing the city's assets and how it's managed and maintained. Can you say what is the government's next move in this regard?
Okay, so I'm aware they have a meeting of the City Council, an emergency meeting today, and to discuss this tragedy. So first of all, the president himself went on the ground, and they are according help. The president has directed that the people who are affected, that they receive the full support of the government of Guyana. So I have some major concerns. APNU has always controlled the city. But it seems as though every single thing that should be done in the city, that by law are part of their mandate, the central government has to take over. And we don't begrudge that support, but we can't intermediate it to the city council that is unaccountable, because we have had experience where they have diverted funds, and two, where until now, as you know, audited statements have not been submitted for several years. So it's difficult to intermediate funds through them. However, the government has undertaken a key responsibility of the city, which is infrastructure, roads. Every road in the city will be done by the central government. That runs into billions of dollars. So for those people who think that the PPP government is punishing the people of the city, we're not doing that. In fact, if you look at all the outreaches, etc., we're spending billions of dollars in the city, in an area there, because the city is still controlled by APNU, for those who like to talk about starving funds. We're doing this all over the country, building roads too. Secondly, we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars on all the recreational facilities in the city, 34 of them being done grounds now with lights, etc. We have undertaken all the beautification of the city, the sidewalk, the boardwalks, and everything else is being done by the government. the planting of trees. You see, we just started outside the Army compound that will grow up into a literal small forest there that will, these are undertaken by the city. We've spent $15 million to take the dump site out of the city. We're now doing the drainage in the city. We're clearing drains, we're putting additional pumping capacity in the city. What does the city do? So if we're doing drainage, grounds, beautification, etc., they literally doing very little. They collect rates and taxes from the same vendors. And historically, let me say, when the vending, the APNU government had, in fact, the PNC, when Tulsi Prasad was part of the CREEP, the Committee for the Re-election of Desmond Hoyt, they gave that prime area opposite the arcade and Water Street. He sold it to him for between $2 to $6 million. We reacquired that land. Guess how much we had to pay? Over $300 million to take back the land. We then gave it to the city council to accommodate the vendors. So people who talk about us now being sympathetic to vendors, we spent that money, and those were in the early days when we did not have much resources. We paid for the land, we paid it, it went to court, we acquired it, and we gave it to the city to accommodate the vendors because we wanted them to have fixed places. We've assisted with building of markets, all of this. So those, they like to say we don't support vendors. So we've supported throughout our history. So this city council is not, what is it engaged in now? Its only concern is spending time on itself and deals. They're busy trying to sell off all the little pieces of land that they have around the city. Secondly, look at how much time in the last month, maybe 2 or 3 months, the mayor has had maybe 5 full Mondays or city council meeting discussing how to block a $300 million US investment that will bring benefits to thousands of Guyanese and will beautify the city and expand his tax base. He has spent all of this time in the last 3 months discussing that, falsely claiming that they own the land, getting involved in all sorts of things. How much time did he spend on better service for the people in the market or trying to rehabilitate infrastructure? Now we have the crisis, he's doing an emergency meeting on the market. He knew about the state of the infrastructure there. Now further, for this year, they have to statutorily present their budget. He has not presented a budget up to now for this year. So what are his projects to rehabilitate market or fix anything in the city for this year? Abdication of responsibility. And all of this gets swept under the carpet, the uselessness there, and then we have to take the heat on it. They don't managing the assets in favor of the people in the city. It's a cabal, APNU cabal there. So an abject failure on the PNC City Council. And that is why the president had to make that statement. The people, they spread rumors all the time among vendors, oh, we hate them, we do this, etc. That's all they do. Nothing in terms of services. We haven't even helped with garbage now. Imagine a central government and you have a full city now and a city council and billions of dollars in revenue that they get and no audited statements. We don't even have a budget. We don't know how they'll spend it. So clearly, the people of the city have to know this. When we campaigned, we said, give us one chance to run the city, and then you will see the changes. Since independence, the PNC has had it. But are we starving the city of funds? You check what's going on in the city now. If you go to South Rumbelt, north, south, east, and west Rumbelt, and Alexander Village, and La Penitence, West La Penitence, and all Boys Town, and Charlestown, and Kingston, and here in Queenstown, and Albertown, and Kitty, and now in Sophia, and really the whole city eventually going to be redone. The roads, we're working on drainage, etc. So there's no starving of funds for the city. It's just that you think if we give them money to spend on a road, you think they would ever spend it on the road? They just take it and it would end up somewhere else. So this is a failure of the city council, but notwithstanding there, let me use this opportunity to say how how sad we are about the tragedy and those who were injured and lost their business, etc. As the president himself said, they would get our support. Thank you. Yes.
Taking you back to this dispute amounts with Linseka, the discussions that are going on for the 50 million.
Yeah.
I want to know what impact, if any, that is going to have on the loan with US Exim, and if they are, or if they'll have to await that settlement before a decision can be made on that loan. That's one part of it. The second part of it is what time frame has been given for the conclusion of these discussions with Linseka? 50 million is a substantial amount.
Yeah, but Marcel, so the thing is that their claim, let me make it clear, they have claimed this figure. Our engineers, the international supervision firm, said they're not eligible for a cent. We have offered 3 months extension in time. Their liquidating damage is over $11 million a month if they don't complete the project on time. So they have to pay back, US dollars I'm talking about. Now, the process, the evaluation has been completed for the Exim Bank loan. This is not going to affect the processing of the loan. If we refuse to abide by the terms of the contract, which is providing for independent arbitration or mediation when there is a dispute, that could be considered expropriation if it's a US company. That could affect, but we are following the grievance procedure as established by the contract itself. So that will not affect the processing of the loan. Time frame about the discussion, I do not know, but that is not affecting the movement on the project. Okay? But this would be done.
And an update on the other part was an update on that loan.
Okay, but that's what I said.
From the U.S. end.
So we were told, my last report was that they've completed the final due diligence. They came down here, this was about a week ago. There are no adverse findings, so hopefully now the loan would be able to go to the board. Now, when the U.S. makes loans of this nature, they also have to do their independent checks. And they've done all of those on financial feasibility, environmental sustainability, all of those issues. So we're expecting that to be processed.
My last question is for an update on the oil blocks awards from the auctions.
Okay, there's one that is ready to go to cabinet. But what I said to Vic is that at the cabinet level, the last thing we want is to have the fiscal terms preserved in every contract, but then in every contract, the other conditions of the contract for the same type of work changing. So what we want is a kind of uniform contract in all of the clauses. Because we may end up, if we go earlier with one and then we're negotiating the technical agreements with the others, then we may end up with a different set of concerns raised, etc. So they were going to have a final meeting this week with all the parties involved to look at the technical comments and then make sure that whatever goes to cabinet, some will go earlier to cabinet, that it will be a contract that will be acceptable to all the parties. Remember, we've made it clear that the fiscal terms are non-negotiable, but we're still prepared to look at the non-fiscal terms because they complain that it's pretty onerous. We went from one extreme to the other extreme in terms of not having, no consequences for having a block and not doing anything, to this massive, could be $200-300 million fine, US dollars fine for doing it.
Good afternoon, Dr. Jagdeo, Anas Williams, Culture News. The Parliamentary Committee on Natural Resources has made requests twice to the EPA and ExxonMobil, but so far as we are aware, they haven't had any sort of positive response from either of the agencies.
Who is chairing that committee now?
Pardon?
Who is chairing the committee now? Are we still chairing it? Are we chairing the committee? Who's chairing it now?
Let me find.
You don't know?
No,
I don't know
it's on my
myself.
notes.
I don't know. All right.
It's the Minister of Natural Resources, Minister Vikram Bharat.
Vikram Bharat, yes.
And so, can you say when the Parliamentary Committee will have some sort of an answer from the EPA whether they would have these meetings or not?
So have you asked Vikram Bharat, who is not only minister,
We
but
have.
he chairs the committee. Have you submitted any statement to him, written him, catch him at a corner somewhere and ask him? When he goes everywhere. Ask him, when do you plan as chair of a committee to have these people before you? Have you given them notice? What do you have to say whether they didn't show up or not? What do you have to say? You find it acceptable? Please do that the next time.
Yes, but I believe my colleagues and I would have come here multiple times with other issues, reaching out to Minister Bharat. He doesn't respond, and then when we come here, you send us back to him.
But then I asked him that one specially. Let him respond to that one. Yeah, so I don't want to, you all complain that the same Culture News that I take over everybody work. I come here and want to do everything for every minister, answer for everybody. That is Jagdeo, control freak Jagdeo, worse than Kim. The whole Kim family put together. Together. That's in Culture News, read that. He wants to control everything. He wants to answer for everyone, and then you come in to ask me about, again, to answer. Again, I will, but to make an attempt to talk to Vikram first. Ask him that specific question. If he doesn't respond, then I'll give you.
Keep an eye out. Additionally, can you say if the new legislation will seek to cap how much coverage Guyana gets in the event of an oil spill?
The legislation is being developed. It will speak about responsibility. So it's just being drafted now and looking at the experience around the world. So once that's done, it will be, you would know about it.
Good afternoon, sir.
But I hope that you praise the government a little bit for passing legislation of this nature. Very few countries have that. I hope you will say something positive about that. And I was shocked that Culture News accepted with the aircraft, right, that they made a mistake and they apologized, retracted the story. But next to the retraction, they had 4 false stories again, are surrounding the retraction. So please.
Good afternoon.
Surrounding the retraction. So please.